How many times have you been in Queensland recently?
3 times in 3 weeks.
What was the best time?
I came once by boat, once by aeroplane,
yeah.
and they told me that the plane was going to be delayed, and I wasn't trusting Qantas to get me here tonight, so I drove today.
Well, thanks for doing that. Good on you. And so where do you drive from to come up here this evening?
The mid-north coast of New South Wales, a little place called Bonny Hills, which is just near Port Macquarie.
Anyone been to Bonny Hills? Yes. All right. All right. What do you get up to at Bonny Hills these days?
Well, some people go there for their honeymoon.
Right.
And what do I get up to? Well, I'm kind of recently retired for the 3rd time as a pastor.
Uh-huh.
And I do a bit of kind of coaching of people in ministry.
Yep.
I'm married to Fiona, and she works as a GP in town, and we've got a mini groodle called Pippi, and I walk the beach with Pippi and pick up Pippies and things like that.
And you've got a growing brood of grandchildren, I believe?
We do, yeah. We're very blessed to have 6 grandchildren in Port Macquarie and 1.5 in Canberra.
Uh-huh. And birthdays this week you've missed out on?
Yeah, there's one today, our 8-year-old today, and our 1-year-old 2 days ago.
Righto. Now, we've known each other for a while now through various church connections, a long time now. I think I can remember being in a hot tub about 25 years ago at the start of a church.
No, I don't remember it.
You
No.
weren't there. There you go.
That sounds a bit dodgy to me.
Yeah, forget about that. Well, there's a few other blokes there as well. We're trying to organise how to do a whole lot of stuff around the world. But anyway, there you go. So I remember going to a conference, I think it was called an Oxygen Conference for a whole lot of Christian-type people way back when. And you were speaking at that conference, until it's not speaking on the main platform necessarily, but I just had an interview, and you were telling us about your plans to move to the Northern Territory.
Yeah.
And start a church there, but then things didn't continue that way.
No, that's right. It was back in 2011, so we'd been living in Canberra for 21 years. We'd been involved in a university ministry there, and then starting a church, and the church had been growing for 15, 16 years. And my wife, who was a GP and had been working in Aboriginal health, and I, for very different reasons, both had a passion for the north of Australia. And we had connections to Darwin, we had connections to Arnhem Land through various people we knew. And the church that we were at in Canberra had a lot of people in the Defence Forces, and so they would regularly kind of graduate from ADFA or RMC and find themselves up in the Darwin area. And one of the things that we kept hearing was that there was a need for more churches, particularly in Palmerston, which is just south of Darwin proper. And so we made a decision somewhere in that year, mid-year, that we would finish up in Canberra and we'd start a church up in Darwin. And I can still remember announcing it to the church because I was slow in saying it. I got up and I must have looked really serious because I said, Fiona, that's my wife's name, I said, Fiona and I have something important to share with you. And I had about 4 people come up later and said, I thought you were going to say you're getting divorced. And I thought, no, it wasn't that. But we let the church know that our plan was to move. We had 4 kids, and so it was going to be moving the younger 2. The older 2 were at university, and one had got married a couple of months before. So yeah, that was our plan. And I think when you heard me at this Oxygen conference, I was being interviewed as this middle-aged man who'd been involved in ministry for a number of years, who wasn't hanging his boots up, but was going to the north of Australia to kind of do it again. So.
Yep. So you got organised to go. You had a team. Was it some people going to go with you as well?
Yeah, we did. We had a few people who were living up there who were very keen that a church would start near where they were. We had a few military people that we knew who were going to be moving up there, including a doctor who was going to be working with the army. And a handful of people just made the decision, sure, let's join the adventure. And we had a couple of trainees who were going to come up with us as well. And one of the things, we got tipped off by the military guys that removal companies jack up their prices around Christmas because there's a steady flow of people going from Canberra to other places, particularly Darwin. And the price increase over Christmas is something like 25-30%. So we thought, we'll beat the rise and we'll empty our house, we'll put it in shipping containers, and we'll send it up to the north of Australia. And you know how Katherine has recently had flooding? There was flooding at that time, and I remember seeing shipping containers falling off the train into the river at Katherine, wondering if they were ours.
And was it?
No, they weren't. No, our stuff stayed dry. But, you know, the move was on. We'd bought a house.
Yeah. Had you packed up Canberra house?
Yeah, we were pretty much camping in our own house. We'd had a garage sale, got rid of all the build-up. My wife had a job because she'd been working in Aboriginal health. She literally just walked into the first Aboriginal health service in Palmerston, said who she was, and they said, do you want a job? We'll pay for your removal if you want to come up here. And we thought, well, we're coming anyway, so may as well get in on that. That's kind of where we're at come December that year.
Right.
Yeah.
So you were all packed up, ready to go, but that didn't quite happen.
No, it didn't. It was kind of conference season for me at the end of that year. I'd been in Canberra for 21 years, and they invited me to give a talk at this student conference that happens in Canberra every year. And I'd done that, and I was just meeting in a cafe with some mates after I'd given this talk. And I'd been feeling, well, go back a little bit, I'd been feeling like I was pretty unfit. I'd been having a few aches and pains. There was a place where I'd been staying a week before that had 4 flights of stairs, and I remember having to stop on the landing each time. Anyway, I was sitting with these guys in the coffee shop and people are talking, and I'm just starting to feel my left side going numb. I was actually, it felt like my left arm was just getting heavier and heavier, so I couldn't hold it. My left leg's going numb. I had a pain between my shoulder blades. I'd said to Fiona that morning I felt like my chest was beating outside my body, and she'd given me what I thought was a hug, but it was actually just a consult.
So she's a medical doctor. She got some idea that something was
Yeah, she had a suspicion that something wasn't right, and I think I should have realised something wasn't right because we'd had the garage sale the Saturday before, and Fiona likes to go and get a massage when she's been busy and stressed and so on, and I'd never had one. So she said, right, the garage sale's finished, let's go and we'll get a massage, we'll book it in for an hour. And I could not believe how massively painful a massage is.
Yeah, I've had one, never going back again.
She comes out feeling like she's floating, it was fantastic. I'm feeling like I've just been run over by the wallabies, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And I couldn't believe the amount of pain that I was in. But anyway, so I say to this mate, who's actually a mate of yours, who trained as a doctor, wasn't working as one, but I described my symptoms to him while we were having coffee. And he said, we've got to take you to hospital straight away. He thought I was having a heart attack. And he said to the guy that was driving me there, he said, take him straight into the ED and say to the triage nurse, query heart attack. And I've since discovered that that's the way to get attention. Like, you might twist your ankle, right? You might fall over, you might hit your head, but if you say query heart attack, they give you immediate attention. And so they literally just wheeled me through into the ED, hooked me up to a heart monitor, but there was nothing wrong with my heart. And they were still puzzled. They were particularly puzzled because of the pain in my back, because apparently a pain like that between your shoulder blades is often, well, can be a symptom of an aortic rupture. So they weren't happy that the X-ray, they did an X-ray. It didn't show anything. They then did a CT scan, and by this stage, my wife had arrived, and I can still remember the doctors conferring at the end of the bed, and I heard them say, he's got a tumour. And I tell you, when I heard that word, tumour, it was like the tear ducts just opened up. I was 49 years of age, and I thought I'd just been sentenced, you know. They didn't know exactly what was going on, but they could see on the CT that there was a dark mass on my left lung, and there was a lighter mass right around the lung. And later we discovered that there was close to 3 litres of fluid that had built up between my lung, my left lung, and the pleural lining. And they tried to drain it. They'd stick a needle in, and each time they'd hit a rib and I'd almost go unconscious. Eventually someone got smart and took me to do it under guided ultrasound, and I couldn't believe it. They just hooked me up to this machine, and it just kept flowing and flowing and flowing. And there was something wrong. At that stage, they thought it was potentially asbestosis.
But you haven't worked in an asbestos mine?
No, I hadn't. I'd been caving, and I just had this strange thought that maybe bat poo had asbestos in it. I have no idea why it would. But yeah, that was kind of what they thought, mesothelioma. Bat poo?
Well, I don't know.
Well, it might have been better than what I had, yeah. So it was a pretty dramatic day. I can remember it vividly. It was the 2nd of December in 2011, and we didn't know what was going on, but we knew it wasn't good. That's probably the simplest thing for that day. They couldn't do anything on the Friday, so they sent me home. And it was our wedding anniversary on the Saturday. And I can't remember the wonderful things I had planned for my wife, but I'm sure it didn't involve wearing a hospital bracelet. And then I had to go back in on the Monday, and they opened me up, and they found that I had lung cancer.
When you say they opened you up, what do you mean by that?
Oh, they operated. They had a look inside. They took a biopsy. They found a tumour on the lung. They found that it had spread into the pleural cavity. It had spread into the lymph system. They couldn't tell me exactly what that meant, and I think it was 2 or 3 days later I finally got to speak to an oncologist, and he said to me, when I asked him what can you do, he said, there's not really anything we can do, it's incurable. And I just remember that was the second time my throat knotted and the tear ducts kind of opened, because he was telling me that there was nothing they could do. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, we can't actually get rid of this kind of cancer. I said, can't you just chop it out? He said, no, because it's actually spread, and it's spread into cells that we can never identify. And so I said, what can you do? And he said, well, we can try and make life more comfortable. And the only option was chemotherapy. I asked how long I had, which was a silly question to ask when I was on my own without any support. And the doctor didn't have much of a bedside manner, and he just said, well, you might see the following Christmas. And I went, might? 10 to 13 months was the life expectancy of stage 4 lung cancer that I had. Yeah, so it's pretty devastating.
I reckon. At that conference, I think there was another significant other sort of pastor type person in your life, and I think they came and visited you and some words to you.
It's funny, I don't have a lot of recollection, but apparently the nurses put up a sign saying no visitors without checking on the with the nurses station, because I'd been working with people that were part of this conference, and almost everyone I knew in Christian ministry was in Canberra, and there was 1,500 students, and I probably knew a couple of hundred of them. Yeah. And so people just kept coming, and I've had some friends say, "Oh, we went and visited you," and I don't remember. They're probably making it up, but did you visit me?
No, I didn't.
Okay. But some people don't get visitors, and I was just getting smashed with them. But it was, some tough questions were being raised, some difficult things to work through.
Okay, so you've had the bedside manner doctor talk to you.
Yeah.
What happened next?
Well, they had to put me on a chest drain because the fluid would just keep building up. It was just reacting to the cancer. And one night, sadly, in the hospital, the cleaner knocked over the machine, the pump that was kind of draining the fluid, and put it back upside down. And I think that was the beginning of things starting to go really badly for me, because one of the nurses who came in didn't actually know what the machine did or was supposed to do. And so I wasn't really in the best hospital for my condition. They did an operation which is called a pleurodesis. What they do is they literally open up your pleural lining, so between the outer and the lung, and they put talcum powder in there. And they do that because it creates friction and the skin joins to your lung. So, but in my case, it didn't work properly. And it didn't work properly because the drain wasn't doing its job. So I still have a sack of fluid in there that got trapped. But I just started to get really, really sick. And by really sick, my wife, who's a doctor, saw me just crashing so quickly within the first week that she wondered if I wasn't coming home. And I had to be transferred to a more serious hospital by ambulance. They repeated the operation. They put 2 extra tubes in. They monitored things much more closely, and I was still very, very weak and very vulnerable. I suppose a critical but stable condition would be the sort of language that I'd heard. To give you an idea of what happened in my body, I was in 3 and a bit weeks in hospital. I lost 15 kilos. I couldn't process food, and so I got to the point where if I took anything in, it would just have to vomit it back out because it wouldn't go through my intestines and so on. And I couldn't do something as simple as sit myself up in bed or move to the toilet. They gave me this machine. They said, what you've got to do is you've got to breathe. I've been told to breathe, and breathing's something you shouldn't have to be told to do, like it should just happen. But in my case, they needed me to exert some energy, and I've got this little plastic machine. I've still got it. I asked if I could keep it. It's got 3 balls in it with a tube, and you blow. And the idea is that you can blow the balls to the top. I can just go and blows all 3 balls up now. I couldn't get them to move when I first had this machine. And so, I was starting to get really worried. I was starting to get really scared, actually. Fear. And I remember having conversations with my teenage kids about life without their dad. Fiona had to sign over power of attorney to Fiona, and that was pretty kind of in your face. We asked a lawyer to come in and draw up a will because I didn't have one that addressed all of our kids. I had a friend who was an accountant come in, and I'd speak to him about what I could remember about our finances, and he'd write it down because I managed that at home, and Fiona would have probably not known a whole bunch of things. And it was really like preparing for the end. That's what I thought.
So the end sounded like it's coming fast. What kind of stuff are you scared of, sort of around that, like things coming to an end fairly fast? Like, you're a pastor.
Yeah. I think I was just being impacted on every possible front. So physically, my body's going into shutdown, and I've got a stage 4 cancer. Emotionally, I'm really struggling because partly it was pain drugs. I had some, you might have heard of a drug called ketamine. They put me on that stupidly, and I was seeing spiders everywhere, and it was terrifying, and whether my eyes were open or shut. I had various pain specialists come in. There's the emotional stuff that's going on as well. There's fear of loss, and not so much my loss in a way, but fear of my wife becoming a widow, my kids becoming, not orphans, but without a dad, and having some of those really hard conversations. It was, and yes, I'd sat with people as a pastor. I'd sat with people who had cancer. I've been with people as they've been dying. I've offered encouragement to people because I believed in relationship with God, not just for this life, but for eternity. But I hadn't been faced with my own mortality before, not like that. And I remember just starting to doubt, starting to question, wondering whether there is a God, if there is, whether he cares, whether he can do anything. I was being told I had no hope of being cured. Did that mean I just had no hope, that life was effectively over? And so, it was a pretty dark time.
Yeah. Not many of us have been particularly where you are necessarily. How do you sort of reconcile that, you believe in a God and then have told people about him, there's hope in there, but not feeling that yourself?
Well, I think it's easy to look back on it now, and as I look back on it now, I am actually thankful of being confronted with the reality that I'm not going to live forever. Because I don't think most of us think about death. Like, I hadn't seen a dead body until I was 21 years of age, and the only reason I saw that was because I was studying a social work degree, and they took us to the morgue. Just thought that'd be a good thing for us to be aware of. It wasn't part of my relationships. I'd lost a grandfather, but I didn't see anything, and so it just wasn't part of my thinking. I rode a motorcycle. I mean, I thought, I'm indestructible. But I had to take that seriously. I said to some people actually last weekend, I said, don't waste a midlife crisis. I said, if you're young and you haven't had one, I recommend it. If you're old and you feel like you've missed out, you're never too late. Because I think a midlife crisis is just thinking, okay, I've got to the point where I know that I've had more time than I've got left. And that's a good thing to realise somehow. And so it was good for that, but then I had to go back and ask serious questions about, well, what did that mean for the future? Like, is death the end? Is there any hope beyond that? And since I was 19 years of age, I believed that there was. And now I'm kind of having to question it. And I think it's a good thing to question. Many people were surprised that as a pastor I might be questioning those things, but you want to know that your convictions, your beliefs stand up in the face of real life challenge. They're not just fair weather beliefs, right? And I've been to far too many funerals where people, they're just saying, Aunt Mavis, she's in a better place now. And nobody knows what Aunt Mavis believes or anything really. That's just this wishful thinking, probably, like kind thinking. Yeah, nobody wants to think harm of anybody. And so I'm starting to think, well, is there a reason to believe that there's a hope beyond the grave? Is there a reason to believe that this life might not be all there is? Is there evidence for the fact that there's more to life than what we can experience with our senses? I mean, I have a hunch that there is, but is there evidence? And so, with the help of other people, I started to look back at the evidence again.
Right. So, looking at the evidence, what kind of places did you look for evidence?
Yeah, well, I think the key thing that I wanted to be sure about, and I never became totally unsure. I was just being tossed around, right? So I'd say the key place was the person of Jesus. So, I mean, a Christian is somebody who believes something very special about Jesus. Well, let me put that another way. Believes that Jesus is somebody very special. And what a Christian believes about Jesus is that he's actually God, that he's become a human being, and that he's done that with a very deliberate purpose, and that is of creating a way that people who've rejected God can be right with God. And I knew that so much of my life I'd lived to please myself, and I'd rejected God in the process. And so if I was to kind of face God and have to have God weigh up my life, I'd be found wanting. And that would be a problem that not only I'd face, but I think everybody would face. And so I'm convinced when I first become a Christian that Jesus actually makes God known. He shows us what God's like as he lived, things he taught, the things he did. But then Jesus goes to the cross where he's executed. And the perspective of the Bible, there's two perspectives on the cross. And it's not a bad time to think about this because, Good Friday, right, coming up. Why do we call it Good Friday?
Good question.
Yeah, a good question, right? Because it seems bizarre that if Christians followed Jesus, they would go, the day that he was executed on a cross was a good day. And I agree. I don't think it's a good day. I think it's a marvellous day. Why? Well, because the innocent one pays the price for the guilty, and I'm one of the guilty. And so when Jesus is hanging on a cross, he's not dying because he's rejected God. He never did. He's actually kept the law. He's never done anything to harm other people. He's not guilty of any of the things that you and I would be guilty of, and yet he dies. And I don't think it's that somehow he was overpowered. If the things that are said about Jesus are that he could heal sick people, he could raise dead people, he could calm a storm, he could transform all sorts of things, he could have avoided death. He could have avoided being executed by the Romans, but he chooses to go to death on Good Friday so that we can be okay with him. And so I'm looking back again at evidence for Jesus. Did he live? Did he say what it says he said? Did he do what it says he did? Did he die on a cross? What's the purpose, the meaning of that death on the cross? But the clincher really is, if he lived and he died and he's still dead, then it undermines everything that we believe about him. And, mind you, with me in a hospital bed facing the fact that I'm going to be dead in months or weeks, there's no hope to be found in Jesus. But Good Friday is followed by Easter Sunday. And I was just reading the accounts of this again this morning. That is, on the third day, the women go to the tomb to anoint a dead body with spices, and they find the stone rolled away from the tomb door, they find that the grave clothes are still there, but there's no body. And that's a piece of evidence that demands a verdict, really. Did the disciples steal the body and know that they'd made the whole thing about resurrection up and then get persecuted because of it and willingly die for something they knew to be a lie? I don't think so. Did the Romans misplace the body? Well, they were pretty good at executions, and all they had to do was check the other tombs. Did they steal the body and hide it? Well, why would they do that? They had nothing to gain. So there's the evidence of the empty tomb, but there's also the evidence of eyewitness appearances of Jesus. And I remember going back and looking at those. So Jesus appears to people who knew him really well. Now, I'd imagine there's people here who've had the same experience that I've had, and that is when someone dies, you think that you see them in a certain context. We had 2 school friends die in year 12, and I kept thinking that I was seeing them around the shops and at school and different places.
Like were you seeing other people look like?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, there's been situations like that, but you don't do that repeatedly. You don't sit and have a meal with those people and think that they're someone else. And there was one occasion where it says Jesus appeared to 500 people at the same time. And it goes on to just have this little comment. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. It says, many of whom are still alive. And so it's like, you want to check the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, there are 500 eyewitnesses and you can go and talk to them.
This is back a few weeks after Jesus was risen from the dead time.
Well, it's actually written a few years after, but it's saying there were people who were alive in those few weeks after Jesus was raised from the dead, who saw him, heard him, ate with him, walked with him, talked with him, touched him. And for me, it gave me that hope once more that I didn't need to fear the fact that I had a terminal illness, because I was given confidence that by putting my trust in Jesus as he'd been resurrected, so I could be. The other thing is I'm a pretty slow learner, so I thought, and this devastated me, I thought that I'd suddenly got a terminal illness. But in reality, nothing had changed.
What do you mean nothing had changed?
I was born with a terminal illness.
Right.
And you've got the same one.
Yeah.
And so does everybody here. And I'm not just being smarty pants with words, it's the fact that we are all born to die one day.
Yeah.
And we don't know when. Yeah. I'll often say to people with cancer, you've got a prognosis of 4 years. Well, no one has a crystal ball. All the doctors are doing are looking at your symptoms and they're checking the stats on what's likely. And I'll tell you this, because you might be wondering why I'm still here in my 15th year since. When I was diagnosed, the life expectancy for stage 4 with my lung cancer was about 10 months. Now, it's grown to over 7 years. Because in that period of time, there has been wonderful scientific and medical progression that has completely changed the way cancer is viewed and treated, mine in particular. Yeah.
So let's just explore that for a minute or two. Stage 4 lung cancer, do you know how you got it?
No idea. So initially it didn't make sense because I wasn't a smoker. And the most common question I get asked when I say to people that I've got lung cancer is, I didn't know you were a smoker, or were you a smoker? And I understand the question. And it is tough for people with lung cancer because there's a bit of stigma around, do you deserve it because you smoked? Well, particularly for somebody who's my age or older, you go back and you were encouraged to smoke. Even doctors were promoting cigarette packets pre-Second World War. Sorry, I wasn't around pre-Second World War, just in case you wondered. But no, I didn't smoke. I have a particular type of lung cancer that is both common and rare. That is, lung cancer is very, very common. But the type that I've got is only about 3% of a subtype of lung cancer. My wife's a GP, right? So I'll just give you a bit of the story background. She could not understand why an otherwise normally fit 49-year-old non-smoker would have stage 4 lung cancer. And so she pushed and did research and chased around the world and got in touch with some specialists, particularly coming into contact with a guy in Melbourne who was one of the pioneers of discovering a particular genetic mutation that drives lung cancer. And so Fiona pushed our oncologist that I should get tested for this mutation. And I still remember him saying, no, there's no point, because the test's expensive, it's a few $100s, and only 3% of your subtype of lung cancer have this mutation. And I remember thinking, what if I'm that 3%? Anyway, Fiona wouldn't stop, so I got this test, and sure, I had this particular genetic mutation. Now, the good news was that they had just developed a particular targeted tablet for it. Now, I wasn't eligible for that back then. It wasn't on the PBS. I had already had a course of chemo, which meant that I didn't qualify for a clinical trial. But what they discovered about my lung cancer was that my second chromosome had fused with my 5th chromosome, which was like creating a pathway to drive cancer. And so this tablet that they developed unfused the 2nd and 5th chromosome, which is mind-blowing, really, but it didn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So what happened for most people with that early treatment was they do quite well, but then they get brain metastases. And that was pretty bad. So they said to me that I needed to go on to chemotherapy, which is a bit like working out how much poison will kill you and then dialing it back a notch. And again, my wife advocated for me getting a particular chemo that wasn't publicly available in Australia, because they were showing good results overseas with something that we could only get if we paid for. Now, that was a very expensive option, so it was just under $8,000 every 3 weeks. We did that for 4 weeks, and I remember saying to my wife, if I'm going to be dead in a year's time, I don't need you to be broke as well, so why don't we stop this? And in her polite doctor's manner, she said, shut up and don't be stupid. And I shut up, and we kept taking this. Eventually some of the drug companies came to the party and started providing every second dose free, and then every 2/3 of it, and I was on 3 weekly chemotherapy for 4 years. And that was pretty much record territory. Some people get a course that goes for 6 or 8 or maybe 10. I had 67 cycles of chemotherapy every 3 weeks, and my life was so predetermined. I remember saying to some people one time, no, I can't take your wedding because I'm going to be sick that day. And it was literally clockwork. I'd have chemo, I'd be bedridden for the next week, and then I'd have 2 weeks where I'd be okay. And then do it all again, rinse, repeat. And until about 2 years in. So I'd get a scan every 3 months. So the tennis ball shrinks to a golf ball. Another 3 months, it shrinks to a large marble. Another 3 months, it shrinks to a small marble. Another 3 months to a pea. And I remember a mate saying, Macca, I'm praying for a mustard seed next time. And Fiona brought in the scan results and she put them on the bed and said, read this. And I didn't understand many of the words. But basically the last line said, with technical language, no evidence of disease. And so in less than 2 years, I'd had the primary tumour, which they were tracking, because they couldn't track it anywhere else, it just doesn't show up on CT scans, shrinking to the point of no evidence of disease. But then they said, that doesn't mean you haven't got cancer anymore, it means we can't scan and see it. So you've got to stay on chemo. got to the end of 4 years, and I had become so anxious that I couldn't drive near a hospital, I couldn't say the word hospital, I couldn't smell a hospital, the cleaning smell, without going into a cold sweat. And I'd literally had panic attacks, and so I said, can I stop? And because I was in kind of uncharted waters, the oncologist said, yeah, take a break. 3 months and then we'll do another scan. And I came back at 3 months and I had no disease that they could see. And so I said, how about another break? And he went, yeah, okay. And how about another break? And then I said, what if I just stop treatment? And he said, I can't advise you on that. And I talked to Fiona, and I didn't want to do anything that would create any conflict with anybody else, but I did. I just stopped. And I had 3 monthly scans and 3 monthly scans and 3 monthly scans, and I was doing well. And in that time, I got back into work. We moved to Bonny Hills, where we live, and I was in a job for a year, and then funny things started happening. I started to get pains in my body again, and I'd get breathless walking up the hill to where we lived, and I couldn't swim without being breathless.
So you were getting unfit again?
Yeah, I was getting unfit, so I went to a physio, and I went to the gym, and that was painful. And it was just, rinse, repeat, and the cancer had come back. And I remember a phone call from the oncologist saying they've got the results because they operated again, got inside, got another biopsy, and they said, I'm sorry to say that your cancer's returned. Probably never left, but it's returned. It's the same genetic mutation. And that was, in hindsight, that was good, because if it mutates, and they might not have a treatment for the next mutation. But it was also scary because I'd met so many people who went into remission, and then the cancer coming back meant that their time was over. But what happened in that meantime was they developed 2 or 3 more generations of these targeted drugs. And so instead of putting me back onto chemo, I take 8 tablets a day, 4 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. I've been doing it now for 7 years. There are symptoms, there are side effects, there are things that are difficult to cope with, but it's not that roller coaster of chemo. I remember praying a kind of set of bucket list prayers that I might one day get to see grandchildren, that I might one day walk my daughter down the aisle. And that was a big deal because my daughter was born at 25 and a half weeks 30 years ago, and we thought she wasn't going to make it. And then I'd seen the kids married, and I'd seen my son graduate, and God's answered all of those prayers. I've now got nearly 8 grandkids, and one day...
You're still in uncharted territory then?
100%, yeah.
Okay. So what's life kind of look like these days for David McDonald?
Well, I thought I'd never be a minister again, but I've had the opportunity now to help out in 2 different churches and be a pastor, and I love sharing with people about the hope that you can have because of Jesus. Because I think we all live a precarious existence, and some of us will live for 80, 90 years. My dad turns 91 in a few days. We've actually got a friend who's turning 102 on Anzac Day, if she makes this. But it doesn't matter whether it's 49 years, 9 years, or 99 years. One day, I believe, this life will come to an end, but it won't be the end. I think that one day we'll give an account before God. And I want to encourage people to know that there's a real hope for eternity, that there's a real hope for a relationship with God made possible through Jesus. And so one of the reasons I doing this interview with you is I just want to encourage people to answer those questions. I remember one day I was in a coffee shop in Melbourne because I was going down to see the oncologist in Melbourne, and it was closing time and the guy was cleaning up, and I said that I was down there to go into the cancer hospital next door, and we got into this pretty significant conversation, and he said, I'll just say what he said. He said, it's a bloody shame, isn't it, that things have to kind of go arse up before we think seriously about life. And I thought, yeah, it is. Why can't we think about these things when things are going well? Because we take life for granted, I think, is the answer. And so, don't waste a midlife crisis.
So, how would you suggest someone investigate this hope that you've got if they want to do that?
Yeah.
What steps should they take?
Well, I wrote Hope Beyond Cure to give people some stuff to think about. And I know a couple of you have already read it. You said to me beforehand. It's written not from a place of being healed. I wrote it back in 2013 when I was going through the 3 weekly cycles of chemo and there was evidence on the scans. But I'd been changed to have a real hope for eternity by then. And I wanted to write about that for people. So that's one thing. I think it's worth just asking questions about Jesus. So best place to find out about Jesus is there are 4 biographies in the New Testament of the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, to read through them. And it's often good to read it through with somebody else, so if there's someone you can read it through with. I think, because I had a look, there's some leaflets on the chairs, and it's not my job to invite you to this church. Like Roy's the pastor of the church that meets here, but I'm sure you'd like to invite people, so you can do that.
Yeah, we've got a club that meets here every Sunday.
A club?
Yeah, called
Church. Yeah, so checking this church out. And they're doing a thing where you can just ask questions and find out more about Jesus too. So that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, good day. We're going to have a bit of a break now. You can have a bit of a wander around, stretch your legs and stuff. That'll give Dave a chance to sort of just pull his mind together a bit. And then I'm going to interview a bloke named George Pan. And then that'll take 5 minutes or so, and then we'll get you back up here, Dave, to answer questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Well, let me introduce you to George. So, George is a member of our church here, and he was diagnosed with a osteosarcoma of the knee in 2019. And 3 months earlier, he'd actually become a Christian. And I remember the day he told us of his diagnosis here at church. It was a moving occasion for us all. What he didn't say was how serious his cancer diagnosis was, because the doctors said, with their bedside manner, that his particular cancer had a survival rate of 25% for 5 years. And he was told to basically get his affairs in order and do what he'd always planned to do, and don't go looking at the internet about the diagnosis. Soon after, he had surgery and then had chemotherapy, and then a year later he was in remission, and now 6 years later he's having annual checkups. And now, George, I know this is not the case for everyone here, so a couple of things, just 2 questions really. What shocked you about your diagnosis?
Well, it shocks me in a big ways, in many ways. I have X-ray, a routine checkup on my knees in September 2019, and 2 days later, my doctor called me through reception, called me, urgent call, come back to see your GP. And I think they basically already contact my son first. And I think we would have a first contact. And I think it's pretty nervous, And I went to see my GP, and she said, you have cancer in your left knee, left femur. And, this is done through Queensland X-ray. I wasn't quite sure. I don't believe. I say, well, it's some sore knees. I had that before many years ago. Can't be that serious. So I went to Wesley Hospital, further check, and then more serious check this time. And the result come back even worse. And the doctor told me, you have cancer in your left femur, but it is one step ahead. It's already spreading into your lung. That's very serious. And in other words, he says, he wants to say to me that we are too late to do anything for you because it's already spread into your lung. So I was in big shock. I was in big shock because up to that point of time, I has been quite healthy, have a small minor problem. I never stay in hospital for overnight. So, everything looks good for me. And, suddenly I was told I got cancer and spread into my lung. That is one shock. The another shock I have is that 3 months earlier, I became a Christian. And I thought, whoa, now I'm fully proof Christian. I shouldn't worry about too much anything, can harm me. And now 3 months later, I was told that I got cancer and, basically only have a few years to live if I'm lucky enough. So I was questioning myself. I said, well, what's going on here? Why these two things happen so closely, so close to each other, one after another? Are they related? Was God involved in this? Well, if God involved, and what that mean? Is that my sin is too big? I must have a punishment, or it's a trial. So, I have other questions also. Some questions similar to David just mentioned. Worry about the loss. When I die, I left my lovely wife behind. I will leave my children, grandchildren behind. So all that sort of things coming, just one after another. Yeah.
So two shocks. One is you get the diagnosis, being healthy. Second shock, you think Christians should be bulletproof and not get it.
Yeah.
How has then being a Christian actually then helped you through this journey with cancer so far?
Well, I think I have to admit, first couple of weeks, it was chaotic in the family. So, I feel so sad. I have to be gone in a short time, and I was just thinking too many things. I lost sleep, and there's a lot of fear. The fear of death. David mentioned he saw the cop in his life. I have never saw any cops in my life. My parents passed away. I was not with them. I was not there. And my grandmom passed away. They all used traditional way to do. I never saw anything like that. So it's very, very scary. And I think, the death suddenly comes so near me. It's just like you can reach it. So never have that feeling before. But I think I'd be very thankful and very fortunate that I become Christian 3 months before I was diagnosed. When I think who I can rely on, no one can really help me. Basically, when you got cancer, you just, you're dying and no one cannot help you. Doctor may not be able to help you either. They already said it's too late. So I think for 3 months of Christian, it's not a long time. 3 months is pretty much immature, pretty young. But I think it's still old enough or long enough for me to call Jesus is my Lord. He's my Savior. So I can hang on to onto Him. And I think the Christian faith has built very solid foundation for the journey for me. I went through a lot of hurdles. I think the foundation of Christian faith is very important. Yeah. So all I did was pray day and night. I just pray. I think it become a routine thing. Wake up in the morning and I pray. Before I went to sleep, I pray. And when I sit down, I pray. So I think pray actually become a really cure for me during that time. And I think God hear my praise. I think that's what I think. Because the evidence, I'm not sure if you believe it or not, but I believe it. Because first couple months I was just anxious, I just feared. But after that, I suddenly calmed down. I suddenly feel the peace inside me. And just to give you an example, so when I saw my doctor, he explained to me what the chemo is nothing, because the surgery is more worry. Because he said to me, I thought that I have a child, but I can show you my knees here now. He said it's about 7 centimeters. 7 centimeters, the bone is ruined. So I think he has to cut another further 7 centimeters just to make sure every part of the bone is removed and it's more safe. So basically, chop my knees, trim it here, and cut 50 centimeters into my leg, and then will be replaced with mechanics knees and titanium screws going inside bottom and the top. So when I heard this, I thought, wow, I think I could handle that. But before that, I'm scared of those blood and pain. Even my dentist said to me, he's going to pull my wisdom teeth out. I said, no, that's too hard. I couldn't handle. But this time, my knee will be gone. My bones, 50 centimeters of left femur will be gone. I said, well, yeah, I think I could do that. And I was so calm. I was so calm and peace. So I think God gave me their power.
Great. Well, Jack, thanks, George, for sharing these things with us. There's been a number of people that you're thankful for as well. You've read Dave's book.
Yes. I think it's I really think being a Christian, I'm not alone. I got my family behind me, my wife particular, my son Wade. He was doing a lot of communication between hospital and me and myself. So yeah, all the children and grandchildren has been behind me and show their support and encouragement, their love and kindness and patience and caring. So yeah, thanks my family and my wife in particular. And the other thing is the church community is been very supportive and very encouraging. A prayer group was set up during my treatment, so I can look at, the prayer group and everyone pray for me. Keep me in touch with the church community. So that's really, really encouraging. And I remember Roy and the former pastor, John Liu, gave me a book. The title is Hope Beyond Cure. David wrote this book, and I got them just in time. So I read all of it and repeated reading through it. And I remember one of the statements in page 28. I think it was, I remember it clearly. It states, where there is life, there is hope. Equally important to say, where there's hope, there was life. So I think I really think the hope is so important. We must have hope, especially as Christians. We have hope beyond death. We have hope beyond cure. So I think it's very, very powerful statement, and I thank Dave for writing this such good book. And that's many other encouraging things. Church friends bring me gift, brought me plants, brought me delicious food. I thank Tony. Even though at that time I couldn't eat, my appetite's gone, and as David just say, what I ate, I will vomiting. It will come out. But Tony still deliver his delicious meal to me. Thank you very much, Tony.
Okay,
and,
well,
many
George,
other friends as well. Okay,
thank you for sharing, and I'm sure there's more you'd like to say, and people can get you over supper after we've the next section. How about that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just final things.
Yes.
I want to thank Lord, thanks God, saving me. And so every morning I get up, I wake up, I kick my leg, I say, I have another day. This is a bonus, because they say, well, 5 years survival rate is less than 25%. So now I'm nearly 7 years. So I've beaten the 5 years and 25% of survival rate. So thanks to the Lord.
Thank the Lord.
Thanks to everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, George.
All right. Well, I'm going to invite Dave back up, and I'm going to start. Well, I'm going to come around the room. So if you've got a question you want to ask, and you prefer to do it in person, then you can stick your hand up, and I'll come find you. But I'll start with one from the Slido. Dave, when you had this hope, right? You looked at the evidence. You've rediscovered your trust in Jesus, sort of in a way. Did you trust God that you would get better straight away? Trusting in God again, you'd get a cure, you'd be all right, you'd have long life. Or were you still hopeful that even if you were going to die quite soon, you were still trusting in God? Do you want to unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. When I was grappling with these things, I didn't have any expectation of being cured. When I came to be convinced again of Jesus, I still had evidence of the tumour growing, of the impact on my body, and it didn't change my expectation of what was happening to me physically or medically. I was hopeful that I'd see more of the future. I had a friend in Brisbane actually who had exactly the same cancer, and he and his wife put a little campaign together to lobby government for support, and they called it Just a Little More Time. And they were, I think, impressing upon government that sometimes it's not about solving the whole problem and getting a cure, but if there's opportunity to provide treatment that'll give people more time, a better quality of life, they'll spend time with family and so on. And I think that's what I was hoping for. It was kind of on my mind as I stopped treatment, and each new scan didn't show any progression of cancer. It was on my mind as to whether I might be in full remission. I don't live thinking about cancer all the time, even though I'm on daily treatment now. But the real thing was gaining confidence for eternity, not simply for this life.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Someone's asked, what do you mean exactly by hope? Maybe this is talking about the evidence thing. And what do you mean by hope exactly? Is it just wishful thinking? Is there something concrete?
That's a really good question, because I think that the answer to whether something is genuinely hopeful or whether it's just wishful thinking is not found in how much I believe it or how intensely I'm hanging out for something or how persuaded I am by something. The thing that distinguishes wishful thinking from hope is whether there's good reason for it. So I might, have a hope that I'm going to single-handedly sail a yacht around Australia. That's wishful thinking, because there's no evidence. In fact, last time I tried to take a kayak out beyond the first set of breakers, I tipped it over and lost my fishing rod and reel. So I'm not going to be sailing a yacht around Australia. So when it comes to Jesus, is it wishful thinking that there is a God who cares and has made us not simply for this life but for eternal life? Well, what's the evidence? And so I think what distinguishes it in my mind is that I believe the evidence is pretty good. Not mathematical proof. We're not dealing with something that you can kind of solve like a chemistry experiment or an equation. But is there good reason to take the witnesses, the eyewitnesses, the people that were there recording what they saw and experienced as real, as true? And I think there is.
Yeah, thank you. Just looking around for hands. Oh yeah, I'll come to you in a second. Someone's just asked, how can I know, let's say I believe the evidence, I've seen that there's good reason. How do I know that if I believe that, I'm going to be right with God when I die? Is just believing it enough? Do I have to, follow all the rules, all that kind of stuff? Can I actually trust that I'll make it?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of different ways to think about this. One is, let's imagine a situation where when we die, we stand before God and God says, "Why should I find you acceptable?" If my answer starts with I, because I have done this, because I've been a Christian, because I went to church, because I prayed a lot, because I read my Bible, because I think I've done more good things than I've done bad things, because I think I've been well-intentioned. If it starts with I, I'm going to either bring God's standard down to what I can cope with, or I'm going to have a self-inflated view of myself that is really out of touch with reality. My answer won't start with I, it will start with because Jesus. And if it's to start with I, it would be, look, I have no reason to expect anything or deserve anything from you, God, but you've actually paid my debt. You've wiped it clean. The death of Jesus was about cancelling any debt that I had before you. And so I know that you're not going to hold it against me because you've paid for it in Jesus, and that's what I'm trusting in, not what I do, not who I am. And one of the strongest examples of this, I think, there's one of the people who wrote most of the New Testament, the Apostle Paul. He writes to a church, a pretty new church in the area of Philippi. We call the book Philippians. And he says, if anyone had reason to put confidence basically in their pedigree or their performance, it would be him. He was a Jewish person from one of the top tribes. He'd done all the rituals. He was trained as a rabbi, as a Pharisee. He was absolutely meticulous at law keeping. He did everything. He would have won best and fairest every year in a row at the local Pharisee Institute. And he said, I came to realise that what I thought was to my profit was actually to my loss. So he thought that he was racking up bonus points on one side, but he says he's actually getting deeper into debit. And he said, in fact, I consider it garbage, and the word is offal, it's dung. I consider it crap, basically, compared with knowing Jesus, having a relationship with Jesus. And then he goes on to say, not having a righteousness of my own, based on my pedigree or my performance, but a righteousness based on what Jesus has done for me. And so it's about then putting your trust in either yourself, which is stupid, or putting your trust in Jesus. And I think there's good reason to put your trust in Jesus.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
Going through a period of doubt must have been horrible. And it also must have been hard for your family and your church family to watch you go through that period. How did they care for you or support you through that time of doubting?
Thank you for that. It was probably fairly private for me at the time. So I'd been a very public figure. I was a leader of a large church. I preached most Sundays. I talked to people. I was very public, but I'd resigned. I was now sick. I was spending most of my time at home. So I don't think it was something that I was grappling with publicly and therefore creating a crisis for my church. But and I probably didn't talk about that much with my kids. I did talk about it a bit with Fiona, and she was an encouragement. Interesting, one of the things in the latest edition of the book, Fiona's written a chapter, and most people say, they weren't that interested in the book, but now it's worth getting for this chapter. And one of the things that she went through was she'd been looking at what the Bible had to say about suffering, because she thought, hey, we're moving up to Darwin and we're going to be all alone and starting this thing, and she was expecting there'd be some hard times. And so she'd been reading up on that. She'd been looking at what the Bible said about these things. In a sense, she had been strengthening her own faith as she read this. And so she was in better shape than I was, because of preparation that she'd been doing, thinking it was for something else, but discovering it was actually what we were going through as a family, what I was going through personally, in mind. Now, there were various other people out there who would ring. We had people come and visit who would open the Bible with me and just read stuff with me. I had one friend who'd send me YouTube videos and things that I could... it was hard to read, I guess, when you're pretty sick, but watching YouTube videos about evidence for this and that, and grappling with difficult questions. So there was quite a bit of support as I needed it. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, fantastic. Another one from the slide, and maybe just a couple more. There's two questions that are kind of similar. One is, how can you still be a Christian even if you're constantly doubting? And one about, how can you trust, sort of the opposite of doubt, that God is still good even through suffering?
Yeah, I'll try and remember both. How can you be a Christian and still doubt? Look, one of the verses that, and I do quote this in the book because it became very precious to me, there's and I think it's in Mark chapter 9, a guy meets Jesus and Jesus tells him to put his trust in him. Like, I think the word he uses is faith. Put your faith in him, have faith. Faith and trust are basically the same. They're two English words for the same original word. So I trust in the chair, I have faith in the chair. I trust in my wife, I have faith in my wife. It's not that faith's a religious word. But anyway, and another word that's connected with that in English is the word believe. Now, sometimes belief can just mean intellectually, I think this is true, but the belief that the Bible's talking about is believing in something, so you trust it, so you put your faith in it, so you rely on it. So I believe in this chair and I show it by sitting in it. Right? That's the grammar lesson, right? The English lesson. Now, Jesus, he tells this guy to have, to believe, to have faith, to trust. And he says, I do believe, please help my unbelief. And Jesus responds well to this guy. And I thought, that sums up how I'm feeling. I haven't wholesale rejected this. I haven't become an atheist. I was just struggling. And I think doubt is something that's healthy if it leads to going back and thinking things through so that you have reason to believe, reason to trust. And there's an analogy to going to the gym. How do you grow muscles? By resistance, by putting things into practice. How do you grow trust? By resistance, by working out this and grappling with it and understanding it and being confident in it. So I'll just give you one other little illustration with this. Somebody whose relative was a pastor, got sick with cancer, and they were telling me. And I said, why don't you give them a copy of my book, because I was struggling with doubt. And they actually said, oh no, they're a pastor, they're not struggling. And I thought, well, let's debunk that myth. I mean, I'm a human, first and all. I'm a human with frailty and weakness who gets impacted by things. I'm a Christian. That is, I'm somebody who puts their trust in Jesus, but I struggle with that at times. I'm not fundamentally a pastor. That's not who I am. That's not my essence. Yeah. What was the other question?
so dealing with doubt, how can I trust that God is good even when I'm suffering?
Yeah. And that was a big one for me, because a lot of people ask the why question when they're faced with suffering. Why? Why me? Why is this happening? I never did. Never asked the why question, but I asked how can God be good and powerful at the same time? Is it that he doesn't love me, so he's putting me through this? Or is it that he loves me, but he's not all powerful, so he can't do anything about what's happening to me? And I think I had to grapple with that, and I came out with my view of God expanded. That is, that God can both be powerful and be good and loving. And it's not that complicated when you think about it, because there can be good reasons to allow pain to happen. We live in a society now that says, by all measures, eradicate all bad things and all pain in your life. But I have deliberately allowed myself pain over 67 cycles of chemotherapy because I thought it would bring about good. I'm quite happy to sit in the dentist chair and get 10 root canals, because that's one of the things chemo did, it ruined my teeth. Because by having a root canal, short-term pain, I can then be pain-free, and there's so many good reasons for suffering, so many good reasons for pain, if there is good coming out of it. And that's where I saw God at work.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up after this last question.
That'd be a good one.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But if people want to come chat to you and ask questions afterwards, you'll be around for a while?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
This last question, this may be just an encouragement to us. And are there any comforts in Jesus that you just keep coming back to?
Yeah. Yes, there are. Let me answer that in a couple of ways. The first thing is, there's a verse in the Bible, and I was looking at this with a bunch of Queenslanders last weekend when I was up at Mount Tambourine, that says that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. And I think I've experienced some of the fruit of that. Often we don't see the good that God is working, but in God's kindness, I think he's actually shown me some of the good. So I delight to hear that people discover hope in Jesus. So it was great hearing from George. Was George, wasn't it? Yeah. Phew. But the best thing was hearing that you met Jesus before you met your cancer. And God in his timing, knowing that, and the help that you were receiving from that. It's a delight to hear that the book is helpful to people. One of the most wonderful experiences that I've had was, maybe I'll finish with this story. I have two friends in Canberra whose mum and dad were pretty hostile to them having anything to do with Christians. I met them as uni students, and they'd come along to our church, but they'd tell their parents that they were going to the library to study. Fast forward 25 years or thereabouts, and the church that I was at in Canberra was putting on an event like this, except it was over dinner in a club. And my two friends had finally got mum and dad to come along and hear me speak on Hope Beyond Cure. They'd been invited to church, they'd been invited to consider things, they were just not into it. Anyway, just before I got up to speak, after they'd eaten, his mum, or their mum, said to her husband, I don't feel well, you've got to take me home. And you can understand my friends being a little bit cynical, you know, like, how sad, please just stay and hear what this guy's got to say. Anyway, they had to take her home, and she didn't get better, and they took her to hospital and found out that she had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And she literally only lived another 3 to 4 months. But she, in discovering this, she said, I'm so sorry that I missed that guy's talk. Do you think he'd be happy to come around and talk to me? And so I was able to go around to their house and to talk with her and to give her a copy of the book. And I met with her a few times. And then she passed. And when I discovered that she'd passed, her son said, she wants to give you back the book that you gave her. And I said, well, you really ought to hang on to it. And he said, no, you should take it and have a look at it. And I opened it up, and it was a book that had her writing on every page. There were all sorts of questions and thoughts and what about this? And, you know, like just, it was like being in a conversation with this woman, just seeing the questions and things that she was. And as I read it through and I read her comments, I could see that the lights were coming on for her. And there's, toward the end of the book, there's actually the kind of prayer that somebody might pray if they wanted to take hold of what Jesus has done, to put their trust in Jesus. And with a bright yellow highlight pen, she'd coloured the whole thing in. And she'd written the date and a couple of Bible verses, and pretty much I was reading her diary that she'd become a Christian just before she died. She had an extraordinary life. She was a private nurse on the Onassis yacht and had been a private nurse to Winston Churchill. And it was stunning just discovering about this woman's life later, but just the joy of the way God worked through those circumstances to bring her to himself. And he'll do that for you. He'll do that for anybody in different ways. And I want to say, look, you've got nothing to lose by inquiry. You've got nothing to lose by even just a simple prayer. God, if you are real and if you exist and if you do care and if Jesus is who these people are saying he is, please let me know about it. Don't be afraid to say that to God. Got nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Dave, thanks so much for coming this evening, and thanks for making your way up to Suze. Thanks, friends, for coming to I Hope Beyond Cure.